I had this epiphany the other day, and I've been following David Icke's work for a long time and reading his work. I've seen him talk 3 times, met him in Vancouver in 2000, and there's a really interesting philosophy he has, or truth that he espouses, which is believe nothing, perceive. Your point of attention, perceiving reality or perceiving information or what you perceive to be truth, rather than believing. Don't believe, perceive. And of course, with that notion of perceiving rather than believing, I've actually come across a podcast called Crow 777 Radio, introduced to me by a friend of mine called Luke Evans, who the tagline for that is, I think it's the tagline or the credo, perhaps. The credo for that podcast is belief is the enemy of knowing, which makes sense the more I actually come to this place of breaking down the word believe, right? So let's break the word down into three syllables. Believe, right? So be, to me, the meaning of the word be means to embody. I embody. The second word, lie, untruth. Untruth. The last word, V, is an abbreviation of have. Therefore, I have lied to myself. I believe I have lied to myself. Now you can interpret that however you want to, but for me, when I interpret that word and break it down, it's pretty obvious to me that I'm lying to if I believe something, I'm lying to myself. But that's what the word says. You break it down, that's what the word says. I believe that I'm lying to myself. So I have moved my awareness away from believing into perceiving. My point of attention becomes I perceive. Per, miles per hour, it's a number, right? It's a per is the word that gives you a number or an amount. Per, miles per hour, grams per kilogram, so per gives me, I can take this information and I can perceive it, this much information, this much, and look at it and see it and then perceive it. My point of awareness perceives this, because in that perceiving I have a fluidity to be able to change my perception around what I conceive to be information, around what I conceive to be truth, right? What's truth to me? Because when I read books by David Icke, he talks about the nature of truth as a universal generalization for me in many ways. The way he refers to what he says, it feels like it can be perceived through my perception, my point of awareness. Sometimes it's like it's my door is closing behind me, my van door. It's perceived as being universal truth, right? That's the way I'm perceiving it. His truth, potentially, and he might tell you that what the books that he writes, when he writes a book, he's writing his truth. Is there a universal truth around what he writes? Often, I think that he perceives his point of attention is this is a universal truth. But the more I research, the more I read, the more I'm drawn to intuitively look at information, the more I see that my point of perception, my awareness changes and moves and shifts. Like at the same time I'm reading the book by David Icke called The Dream, I'm reading a book called Sources, Swastikas and Psyops by Dr. Joseph P. Farrell, The Breakaway Civilization and Psychological Operations. And as I'm reading that book and I understand the nature of the Nazi International and the Nazi Party's deep research into alternative physics that's not materialistic, reductionist, mainstream Einsteinian, Newtonian physics, I see that my perception is shifting and changing with this information. One amount of information coming from David Icke in regards to the quantum mechanics and quantum physics, and then I'm reading about another whole branch of physics that is also moves my gauge of perception in a very different way. So I'm looking at both of these books as I'm reading them, and my perception's moving. I don't believe anything. And that's one thing I learned from David Icke, was not to believe anything, but to have my point of attention and perceive information, and then allow the information to guide me, and then use my own discernment to know what I'm reading, what I'm seeing and hearing, and what it means to me, right? So I don't believe anything anymore, because I'm not going to lie to myself. So I perceive with my point of attention, and that will change and shift and move, and it does. It moves constantly. Not that I'm in disarray, it's just the information, more information becomes available to me. I'm guided to look at this, guided to look at that. And this is how I wrote my books. I wrote, how I wrote all the books that I wrote, was because I was channeling information, and I was guided to look at, much the way David Icke was, I was guided to look at information and to go to places, to look at locations on the planet, look at ideas around the nature of what consciousness, how it embodies itself in this frequency band we call 3D, and the higher levels of all the other levels of existence, invisible light, and how they all correlate together, and who was behind the curtain, how that controlling hand and force was moving through the populace of humanity, and of course how it was controlling our planetary consciousness, how it was affecting our solar system, and therefore the consciousness within that solar system. If we are truly in a simulation and not inside of a large living being, for me, once again, that jury's out. You've got Gigi Young coming from an esoteric Christianity, Rosicrucian mystery school, teaching, saying that we're living inside of a gigantic being, which to me makes perfect sense. And then you've got this information coming from people like David Icke, who say they were living in a simulation. Can they both correlate with each other and actually exist at the same time? Once again, for me, it's not about intellectualizing something. It's about feeling and then perceiving through my point of attention at this information and going like, well, both are plausible for me. Anything's plausible for me, and with regards to information presented. For me, the simulation hypothesis has more standing due to the nature of my experiences and my empirical experiences around this hypothesis, that we're living in a simulation, a simulated frequency band, right? And there are other frequency bands very close to this one, like you'd have a radio, which is a great explanation that David Icke has, a radio station, a radio with stations all on the dial, and we're just basically on one station while all the other stations are playing at the same time. So I come to this due to the nature of that perceiving and that awareness around where my point of attention is. And when I hear and don't intellectualize this premise, everything is an illusion. Everything is an illusion. I mean, everything is an illusion. Then when I don't intellectualize that concept, when I actually feel into it and perceive it with my point of awareness, how does my reality, how does my frequency band manifest around me when I'm in that place where I understand and not intellectualize, but in my heart know that we are in an illusion. Everything's illusory. It's all an illusion. And of course, when you read a book like The Dream or The Trap by David Icke, or any of David Icke's work, especially from the early 2000s onwards, but more now, I haven't read The Reveal yet, which is the third book in the series of books that he wrote about the nature of reality and who's controlling it in a very concise way, and also in a way with the information that's come to him. As I'm reading The Dream, the book The Dream, as I'm reading it, I understand more that when I was channeling my own work, especially United and Entwined, the two books that bookend, the two novels that bookend my Shadow and Soul series, when I was writing those books, and the information was coming into me, and I was citing books that I was reading in Entwined, but I was also channeling information as well that was coming out of the books that I was reading, information I was reading in those books, but expanding on what I was reading in the books. When I was reading into a passage in a book and using that passage and citing that passage for information, in a historical context, at the end of Entwined, as I'm giving Buford Somerset through Jumanji the history of our solar system, of the solar system and beyond, up until that present moment, and who's behind the curtain pulling the strings. As I'm doing that, but I don't, and Buford Somerset, by the way, doesn't get the full gamut of who's pulling the strings. He only gets so far, and you get the entire picture, the bigger picture that I perceive, information's coming in, things have changed, and still the same, in the same moment for me. And then, but in United, which is the bookend, which is the novel that bookends the Shadow and Soul series, in United, you get to see the bigger picture that Buford Somerset didn't see. But he knows that bigger picture because he's now a part of it. But you get to see it through my writing and through my channeling work, who is really behind the curtain. And for me, back in 2014, I had a feeling it was a form of artificial intelligence, an archontic, which is the archons, which is the word for ruler. It's a Roman word, Greek word for ruler, archons. What the Gnostics called this ruling force, this force that moves through various biological entities. I, in 2014, had a deep impression that this force was non-human, and it was a technological force, an interdimensional AI. And I wrote about it in that book, United, in 2014, published it in 2016, before David Icke actually said it was artificial intelligence. I had that feeling, and then he comes along and writes these books, The Dream, The Trap, and says the same thing. So it's not a belief, it's a perception, and that could change for me, right? It could change. But back to the premise, and not intellectualizing this, perceiving it. How do we perceive this frequency band called reality, 3D? How do we perceive it if it's all an illusion? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to you to know that we're all living in an illusion? This is all illusory. What does that mean to you? I'll tell you what it means to me to know that we're living in, this is all an illusion, right? How do I operate within that premise? If I perceive it as a truth, how do I move through my existence when I'm not trapped in my head and intellectualizing my reality around me? Well, by living in my heart space, doing my best to be anchored in my heart space. I remember the time when I had a super heroic dose of psilocybin mushrooms with great intention. I made quite a clear intention in regards to how I wanted to have them, what I wanted to experience, and what I did experience. Now, I have questions around the nature of what I experienced when I left this frequency band. You know, there was a dissolution of my body. People call it ego death, but for me it was more like there was a dissolution of my physical body, and the fact that I didn't have it anymore or was aware of it anymore. I'd left it, as the sense of like I'd left this frequency band completely, and I was in another place, another band of existence. Whether that band of existence where I was actually an artificial intelligence program, software program running, and I was in another simulation, or whether I was actually back at source energy, is up for grabs. For me, my perception still is, looking at this now, knowing what I know, I'm still feeling into this to decipher and to know. For my own perception, was I in a realm of another simulation, another level of the simulation, another level of the game? And was the artificial intelligence that potentially was creating this realm that I was in giving me that which I truly want to experience in regards to where I was, how it looked, the experience of where I went to? But even if that was, for me anyway, the realm I went to, I left my body behind, and I left this frequency band, and I arrived on a beach, a white sandy beach, and all I could see with my toes, the tips of my toes, sticking out from a white light, like a cocoon of white light, as Don Matos used to say in Carlos Castaneda books. We have beings, egg-shaped light. It was an egg-shaped aura. That's what it was. I had this egg-shaped aura with my toes sticking out in the sand, and there was an ocean in front of me, which looked like a mill pond. It was so flat, but it was an enormous ocean, and all to my left and to my right were palm trees. It was tropical, right? But there were stars in the sky I'd never seen before, and constellations that I'd never seen before, and it was so peaceful and serene. Now, whether that was a software program, a simulation within a simulation created by this Archontic AI, it's up for grabs. I don't know. I'm still working through that experience. But I remember the woman's voice that spoke to me. Was that a program? She said to me, I am God and I am love, and you are a wave. And this tiny little wave hit my toes, came out of the ocean, hit my toes, and then my awareness went into the ocean, right? When I was in the ocean, that's where I felt like I was held by a love that I can't put into words. There's no language, no human language that can describe how I felt. The level of acceptance, the level of nurturing. I mean, it wasn't romantic love in any sense of the word. I felt like I was truly seen for who I was, embraced, nurtured, held, accepted. And I can't put that into it. It's a love that I've never experienced before in my human life. Let's put it that way. So, knowing this is all an illusion. Is that a truth? David Icke wrote a book called Infinite Love is the Only Truth, Everything Else is an Illusion, I think in the early 2000s, which is an amazing book, right? After his experience with ayahuasca in the jungle. And I agree from my own experience in the early 90s, what I had when I took this super heroic dose. But my question then becomes, and this is my perception, with knowing this information, was that another level of the simulation? Was that another level of artificial intelligence, a loosh of my energy to believe that this is where I'm going to go to after I leave this frequency band? I'm going to return to that ocean of consciousness where I had all other consciousness around me. It's like that movie, X-Men, the old X-Men movies where Dr. Xavier, Patrick Stewart's character, would go into that dome and put on the helmet and could actually communicate and perceive and be a part of all levels of consciousness on this planet and maybe beyond. It was exactly the same thing for me, but it wasn't an intellectual or a brain connection. It was a holistic experience of being immersed in an energetic ocean of consciousness and feeling the separation of consciousness around me, but in the same moment having this sense of singularity, of knowing my own my point of attention was here, but I could feel all around me the consciousness of everything, every being. I could feel it all around me, but I held this sense of space, this sense of individuality at the same time. Quite a strange experience, but beautiful. So my question is, was that a level of the simulation, or was that source energy? Because if it's all illusion, what I've been doing the last few weeks, practicing this and doing it every morning and practicing it as much as I possibly can during the day, being a man, and being distracted and being brought back into bouncing off different energetic protrusions and energetic projections from people, because of course when you're in a situation where you have an energetic resonance, your ability to hold that resonance can be deterred by people around you, environments, EMF fields. You've got to be strong to stay in your heart, anchor your attention and your awareness in your heart. I'm doing my best to do that. So for me, this illusion, it's bringing that energy from what I experienced at that level of being in the ocean, whether it was a simulation or whether it was consciousness, source energy. For me, in this illusion is to bring that energy, which for me feels like the only thing that's real in that sense. Infinite love is the only thing that's real, it's like, for me, I want to bring that energy into this frequency band and anchor it and resonate it out into the field, and just see what happens as a real life experiment for me. You know, I've done it before in my life, and it's been life changing because of the nature of what I've experienced by doing that. And Lynn Grabhorn's book, Excuse Me, Your Life is Waiting for You, she says something very similar around your valve. Now, I interpret your valve being your heart chakra. Open it up, and then allow that energy to flow into this frequency band. So let's see how, for me anyway, like I did a video before talking about the nature of it, how I feel in 3 to 6 months. I'll do another video, maybe the end of the summer in this part of the world, depending what part of the world I'm in, how my life is by practicing this in the illusion, you know, the illusion, the simulation, the frequency band, right? We call reality. Whew. Thanks for watching. I truly appreciate it. Mā te awa. I'll see you again soon.